Hey guys, I'm working through a few technical teething problems here. Can you please let me know if you can hear me? Hello? Hey guys. So just as a heads up, there's something really funny happening with my computer right now. So this might crash anytime. Right, so I'm hopeful that it doesn't happen. Worst case, if it does, I'm going to switch over to my primary desktop. Uh, I'm not quite sure what's happening here. It probably has something to do with a Mac OS update, which is causing some trouble for me right now. Um, so hopefully this doesn't really cause too much trouble. But if it does, then uh, we'll restart this session, and I'll move to my desktop machine. That'll probably work better. Okay, so as usual, while we're waiting, I think the lag is also gone now. But while we're waiting, does anyone have any questions? So this is our first Lightroom 101 session, uh, and it's also basically an introduction to digital photography workflow as well as uh, as well as basic editing, right? So we're not just going to stick to the tool of Lightroom. We're also going to talk a little bit about image editing, few do's and don'ts, and some things which have been on my mind about image editing for a while. Right? So, and of course, these are all my personal thoughts about this stuff. You don't have to accept them. You can debate me as much as you want. Most of the stuff which I'm going to say are, especially the opinion stuff, the opinion pieces that I talk about are basically my personal opinion, based on whatever experiences I've had editing and working professionally in photography for a while. So please feel free to ignore that part of it, but if any of that is helpful to you, we can keep talking about it. Now, are there any questions before we start the session? Yeah, so this is a good time um, to ask any questions that you have about editing or what your expectations are about this session. So I have a pre-prepared slide deck as usual. I have a slide deck about what we're going to be doing today. And of course, this doesn't go into a lot of depth. We are not going to go deep into Lightroom. This is just enough information for all of you to get started by yourselves. And as some of you may have noticed, the video quality is much worse than before. That's because I'm forced to use a webcam now. My setup for using my mirrorless camera as a webcam is not working right now, and it's a huge battery drain. Today, I am anticipating a pretty terrible amount of battery drain on my laptop just because of running Lightroom. So I wanted to make sure that um, we can actually get through the session on and not discharge my laptop battery completely. Okay, so Sudhir asked a question: what about Luminar versus Lightroom? So Sudhir, honestly, my experience with Luminar is limited. Luminar's UI is actually pretty modern. I like the UI of Luminar. Unfortunately, no matter how good the UI is, and they also have a bunch of really good AI tools, none of those things are going to replace the fact that Lightroom is tightly integrated with Photoshop, right? So for me, that's the most important part about this. The tight integration of Lightroom with Photoshop, the asset management tools that Lightroom has, which Luminar does not have. By asset management, I mean file management. Uh, there are lots of little file management, quality of life things which are there in Lightroom, which Luminar does not have, or at least I couldn't find them when I use Luminar. So for that reason, until they improve those aspects of it, no matter how good the AI tools are in Luminar, I can't switch. Right? I can't even consider the switch. Now Luminar has a bunch of new AI tools like sky replacement, all that. All that I find rather gimmicky, honestly. So I don't need those tools. I'm happy just doing that myself. So I don't know if that is a good answer for you, but that's the answer I have. I think it's a good tool. It's just that it can't replace, for me at least, a professional workflow. It's fine if I'm just doing one-off edits for landscapes or for Instagram, but it just doesn't work for me it's not robust enough for me to work in a professional workflow. So that's why I can't really use it. Okay, so it's 11. I'm just going to wait another minute for people to join in, or if there are any other questions, and then we'll just get started. So I'll give you a brief overview of what we're talking about today. So we're talking about Lightroom, and specifically there are two aspects to Lightroom, right? So let me just put that on the whiteboard. I have a new tool for the whiteboard now, which I like much better, so I'm going to use this. So there are two aspects to Lightroom. So there's Lightroom Classic, and then there's Lightroom CC. Right? These are two different things. So Lightroom Classic is only on the desktop. By desktop, I mean a desktop operating system, such as Windows 10, Mac OS. It's not there on Linux. Uh, Aditya will get to why Lightroom is different from Photoshop shortly. CC is both on the desktop and on mobile, right? So it's both on Windows 10 and Mac OS, and mobile it's on Android and iOS, right? So this is how it's set up. Now, what are the differences between Lightroom Classic and CC? So we are basically going to stick to, we are going to basically be sticking to Classic. So let me give you a little bit of an overview about Lightroom, right? So Lightroom started way back, I think in 2009, 2010ish. It might be even older than that. I started using it around that time. It was pretty bad that time. So Lightroom started as a way for Adobe to introduce a tool which is designed from the ground up for photographers, right? So if you look at, let me just make a new document here so you can see it. So so earlier, photographers only had, from Adobe at least, let me just use a different color here, right? So as far as Adobe photography tools go, the only thing we had earlier was Photoshop, right? Now Photoshop is a great utility. Photoshop is the granddaddy of all image editing utilities. The issue is Photoshop is not just meant for photographers. It's meant for anyone doing any kind of editing on any kind of digital image, right? So Photoshop was used for digital artists. for retouching, for graphics design, and also for photography. Right? So it has a tool set which is relevant for all these things. It has a tool set which is relevant for so many different kinds of work on digital imagery. So because of that, it's actually a fairly complicated bit of software. It covers a lot of things which we as photographers might not use at all. So now, as a response to the growing increase of digital photographers, so this we're talking about 2007, 2008, 2009, where people really started getting digital cameras on hand. So then the idea was to get a tool. So Adobe decided to create a tool which is only for photographers, right? So then that's where Lightroom comes into the picture. Lightroom is only for photography, and it's been designed from the ground up only for photographers. So this is a big distinction, and there are many reasons why Photoshop may be better, Photoshop may be worse, all these kind of things. But ignore those for now. The only thing which is relevant to us right now is that Lightroom is basically designed from the ground up for photographers. And over time, the feature set has improved significantly to help us edit our photos. So it's still not at feature parity with Photoshop as far as the kind of edits you can do. There are things in Photoshop which are just not there in Lightroom. Things such as luminosity masking, very refined edge selection, just from a photography context. Very refined edge selection, blending modes, layers, all these things don't exist in Lightroom. They only exist in Photoshop. But Adobe's stance is that Lightroom and Photoshop form two parts of the photography process. So even if you try and get the photography bundle from Photoshop, you get Photoshop and Lightroom together, right? For your, I don't know how much it is now, must be 700 rupees or 800 rupees now, but you get both those things together. So Adobe obviously considers those things to be integral. Now what's happened is recently, and by recently I mean over the last 3 years, there's been a great increase in cell phone mobile photography, right? So as a response to that, Lightroom has bifurcated. So now you have Lightroom Classic. This is the same software which has been around since 2009. And then you have Lightroom CC. When you get a subscription for Lightroom Classic, you also get Lightroom CC included in it. So when you get the photographers bundle of Lightroom and Photoshop, you get Lightroom CC included. So Lightroom CC is basically a cloud-based, mobile-based, simplified version of Lightroom Classic, which runs on almost all mobile platforms. And it's been optimized and completely modernized to run on cell phones, on tablets, uh, though it's still not at feature parity with Lightroom Classic. So it has features which are missing, which are there in Lightroom Classic. But in my opinion, from what I see, Adobe is trying to make these two have feature parity, right? Eventually, there'll be feature parity. Currently, Lightroom CC does not have file management. It has very poor file management capabilities for local files. Adobe's vision for Lightroom CC is that it's going to be cloud-based, right? And why do they have that vision? Because cloud-based means they can make more money, right? Because you have to pay them for storage. Lightroom Classic, on the other hand, is oriented around working on your locally stored data, no cloud storage, right? Lightroom Classic currently has features which Lightroom CC does not have. It does not have Lightroom CC does not have panorama merge, which is a really important feature. It does not have HDR panorama, but every new iteration, you get new features, right? So eventually there'll be feature parity. Okay, so this is a basic outline of the Lightroom ecosystem, right? So this is how Lightroom is oriented currently. You have Lightroom Classic, you have Lightroom CC, and I'll show you a little bit of both of them, and I'll show you the differences as well. Right, so now let's get back to the Lightroom 101 workshop. So now, before we get into Lightroom itself, right? Before you get into Lightroom, and I apologize if some of you joined here expecting, me to show you tips and tricks about editing photos. I'm not going to do that. Right? So there's a big reason for it. We'll talk about it when we have a short recess. But the idea of Lightroom or this session is to understand something called workflow, which is what we're going to talk about right now. So what is workflow? So workflow is let me just write that down so everyone gets it. It's a series of steps to achieve a goal. Right? That's a workflow in this context. So in the case of photography, for workflow, we follow a series of steps right after taking the photo. Our job as digital photographers does not end when we press the button. Our job as photographers in any case doesn't end when you press the shutter release, right? It actually really starts there. So the work of the photographer begins there. And as soon as you press the shutter release, there are a series of steps that you follow to get the photo from its initial state to what I call the deliverable state, right? That's a state that you can actually present the photo to a client, right? So that's the final goal. Now, the client may be, by client, I mean whoever is going to be viewing your photos. So the client could be, for example, you putting the photo up on Instagram, right? In that case, the clients in that case are all your Instagram followers, right? So the client is different in each context, but the goal is the same. You're preparing the file to deliver to your client, right? So workflow follows a series of steps. Now it's important to follow the same steps every time. Now, why is that? Because workflow should be a habit, and it's a really important habit to inculcate. If you follow the same steps every time, then the chance of making a mistake is very minimal. Okay, so we're just going to go over we're going to go over workflow. What are the steps of workflow? And then I'll stop for a little bit, and we can resolve some questions that you might have about workflow. Okay, so now the first step of a workflow obviously is capture, which is capturing the data, the digital data, right? So in our case, we use a camera. We use a camera, right? But you could also do the same thing with a scanner. So if you're shooting film photography and you wanted to integrate film photography into digital workflow, you would just use a scanner, right? But we use a camera. Okay. So now you shot the photograph. What is the next step after you shoot the photograph? The next step after you shoot a photograph is obviously the ingest stage, right? The ingest stage, this, right? Now, what is ingest? Ingest is basically taking the data and copying it into your storage medium of some sort, right? So by storage medium, I mean your hard drive, your network storage. We don't use CD-ROMs or DVD-ROMs anymore, so whatever that is, right? Now, in this little presentation, I've given you options of tools that you can use to complete the ingest process, right? You can the point of doing it this way is that you know that you can do the workflow with any number of tools as long as the workflow gets done. So we are only talking about Lightroom, but you could do the same thing with a tool called Photo Mechanic, which a lot of people like, or even Adobe Bridge. I know a few of you even on the stream like Adobe Bridge, right? So ingest is basically taking those files and copying it. I'm just going to add one more in here. You could even use Windows Explorer or Mac OS Finder, right? Both of those would all, both of those tools would also work equally well for ingesting, right? Now let's move on to the next step. So here's the most important part. And some of you, when I used to be more active on Facebook, a lot of you remember, and I'm just going to write it down because a lot of people remember this. Uh, who remembers Backup Thursdays? Right? Who remembers Backup Thursdays from my when I used to be active on Facebook? So after you ingest, that is after you copy all the data into your machine or into your storage medium, you need to back up that data. Now, I have an entire presentation about how to do this, so I'm not going to get into much depth here, but I'll just give you a few overviews. So people can use Lightroom to do the backup. People even use Photo Mechanic to do the backup, and there are also miscellaneous utilities. There are a lot of miscellaneous utilities to do backup. There's Acronis, there's Carbon Copy Cloner. There are a bunch of utilities you can use to complete your backup. But remember, backup must be done immediately before the culling step, right? It should be done between the ingest and the culling step. You finish copying, then immediately you must back up all your data, right? You shouldn't wait. You shouldn't wait, do some selections and then back up your data. You should just do it at that point in time. And I'll get to why that's important in a second. Okay, so now we have backup completed. Yeah, looks like a lot of people remember backup those days. So after capture, then you have culling, right? We're at the culling stage, right? So what is culling? Culling is basically selecting, right? Culling is selecting your best photos, rejecting your worst photos. And the tools we can use for this, you can use Lightroom, you can use Photo Mechanic, you can even use Adobe Bridge for doing these things, right? So now here's the thing. Culling is a vital, an absolutely vital part of your workflow. Why is it vital? The Your effectiveness as a photographer, as an artist, is your taste, right? The thing which makes you a good photographer is basically your ability to decide what looks good. So let me back up a second. To truly understand, in my opinion, what makes you a good photographer is not your ability to use a camera. Your ability to use a camera makes you a good makes you a technician, right? I know lots of technicians. I consider myself to be more on that side of the equation than the artist side of the equation. Right? So a technician is a guy who's phenomenal with the tools. He's excellent with the tools, excellent camera operator. There's a big difference between a technician and an artist. We should strive to be artists because honestly the technical side of our art is getting easier and easier. So being a pure technician is going to become less and less important over time. At least that's where I see our art going. An artist, what makes you a good artist is not your ability to use a camera well. What makes you a good artist is the ability for you to understand what looks good and what looks bad, right? Uh, or what looks beautiful. To understand what looks beautiful, or to be able to recognize, even on an instinctual level, what looks beautiful, that's what makes you an effective artist. And that is a sort of a combination of your culture, where you've been brought up, of all this media you've been seeing, of all the photos that you've been seeing, your appreciation for those photos, the way you think, all those things give you your taste, your sense of taste, right? Your taste is your ability to understand what is good or bad. So your ability to understand that this photo is good and this photo is bad is essential to being a good photographer, right? That's what we just concluded. That's what I just concluded. So as a part of that process, you have culling, right? Culling is an important part of that process. Culling is picking the good photos, rejecting the bad photos. Now, for most of you, for most new photographers, this is actually fairly challenging. So for most new photographers, let's say if you go on holiday and you shoot 1,000 photos, right? Most new photographers will come away saying that 200 of these are good, that these are good photos. These are photos which I really like, and these are good photos. Now, if I come away from a holiday with 1,000 photos, I probably get five or six that I like, right? Now, what is the difference? The data set that we're working on, the 1,000 photos, the same for both of us. Now, what's the difference between these two? If you get 200 photos out of 1,000 that you think are good, that doesn't mean that you're getting better. That means you're a good photographer. It just means that you have poor taste, right? That means your ability to recognize what's good and bad, or that filter which you put, is not of good quality. So you have to be very particular about selecting good photos, right? And there's a really, I'm just going to move to my other thing here. So one of my friends and I were having a discussion about this, and we were trying to figure out a way to how to communicate this to people, right? That it's important to be very, very selective about your photographs. So we came up with the analogy, and this is our DevOps analogy. People in IT will know this. They are photos, cattle, not pets, right? So this is the analogy we read online for this. By that I mean photos should be treated like cattle. That means you shouldn't have an emotional attachment to cattle. You don't have emotional attachment to cattle, right? Because they all look uniform. You do have an emotional attachment to pets. So the idea is if you get emotionally attached to a photograph, you become unable to decide whether the photograph is good or bad. I'm not talking about the emotional content of the photograph. I mean so let me give you an example of this. Let's say I went to Iceland, which I went last year, and I hiked up a mountain. I took a really long time to get up there, and it took me a lot of effort to get to that point. And then I shot a photograph. Now the photograph may actually be quite mediocre, but it took a lot of effort to get to that place to shoot that photograph. So now I have an emotional and physical investment in hoping that photograph is good, right? So now that photograph has become a pet for me. I have so much invested in that photograph that I am unable to make an objective decision about whether that photograph is good or bad. So you need to get out of that, right? So you need to be able to decide whether a photo is good or bad without being invested in the effort you put into the photograph. The photo is good, the photo is bad. Even if you hiked a mountain, you did a 20-kilometer hike to get the photograph, the photo might still not be a good photograph, right? So that's an important thing to note about culling. Right? So you have to be very, very particular about culling, right? So now, for culling, you have a bunch of tools which you can use. You can use Lightroom, you can use Photo Mechanic, you can use Adobe Bridge, right? And there are more, of course, but these I only have three columns, so I'm only going to stick to three tools. All right. So you finished culling. Now you go to capture. You go to the next step after culling, which is the editing stage. We are here right now, right? We are at editing, right? This is where the magic happens. This is where you start editing your photographs. And for editing, we are using two tools, Lightroom or Photoshop, Lightroom 4 or and Photoshop. We could use both of them together. There are other tools, of course. Someone mentioned Luminar. There's Capture One. There are a lot of tools you can use. But I'm just putting two here because these are the tools that I use. Now, important thing about editing, and I know I went over this in Photography 101. The purpose of editing is not to, editing can be anything. Editing, editing has basically got a little bit of a bad name, right? So a lot of people think, oh, you're manipulating the photograph, you're changing reality, you're doing all sorts of funny things. Editing can be anything. You can decide what you consider to be editing, and anything is okay, right? You could decide that changing anything beyond color and contrast is something that you don't like doing. And for a lot of photojournalist competitions, it's definitely not recommended to do anything above that. So photos are basically banned out of those kind of contests like World Press Photo. If you do anything beyond doing contrast and color adjustments, the photo is not acceptable because that's a journalism competition. So they require the photo to be as truthful as possible. Of course, there's no such thing as truth in photography, but they expect it to be as close to truthful as possible. If you're talking about glamour retouching, people literally replace the skin of a model, right? Uh, they replace the skin of a model, so that's a completely different part of it. So all those things are okay; those are perfectly fine, and those all come under the purview of editing. Right? So we just have to keep in mind where we draw the line for ourselves, and I don't judge anyone for taking that line very far ahead. Right? There are people who will shoot landscape photographs with completely replaced skies, right? The sky is shot in a different place on a different day, facing in a different direction. I don't particularly care, right? As long as it's done well and it's done tastefully and it's done beautifully, to me it's fine because ultimately we're making art here, right? There should be no restriction on art. You should do whatever you want to do. Uh, you just can't enter that photo. You can't enter a photo with an altered sky in a photojournalism competition, for example. Right? So those are different constraints. But that's the editing process. And we use a bunch of tools for editing, and we'll get to those tools. Don't worry, I'll get to all your questions as soon as I finish this little flow chart of mine. And what's the last step of the workflow? The last step of the workflow is export. Right, we're here right now. Export. Export is preparing the file for your client or preparing the file for the final display. That's how I'd like to say, to put it, right? So how do you prepare the file? I use Lightroom or Photoshop, right? I can use either of these tools to prepare the file. So the export process prepares the file for the final intent, right? If the final intent is printing, after this you would go to printing or you'd go to web, right? Or you would just put the file somewhere and forget about it, whatever you want to do with it, but it prepares the file for that final intent. So for me, for my weddings, after I export it, it goes to my client gallery. Right? That's the intent. So it's resized and prepared for that intent. For printing, so for example, for the Shrikon, we had to do a lot of printing. I had to export the file in a particular format to make it ready for the printer. right? So that's all a completely different process, but that's the export process. The export process, the last step of the chain, right? So we do this to make sure the file is ready for whatever intent we have at the end, right? So this is the workflow. Now this is the entire workflow I have up on the screen right now. Now I'm going to take a minute to stop and respond to any questions I see on the stream or any comments that you may have. This is super important, and notice most of it is actually pretty agnostic as far as the tools go. You can use whatever you want, but the important thing is that you follow the steps. If you miss a step, there's going to be a problem. You might not face the problem now, but you'll face the problem maybe a year later, a few years later, and then you really, really regret not following the workflow, right? So now I'm just going to go through, please feel free to put in any questions that you have here, and I'll go through them. Mhm. I see a lot of people remember Backup Thursday. Yeah, it's a good thing. I hope you actually follow it. Yeah, so we have someone, Omkar is from obviously knows cattle versus pets, so that's the way I think about it now. Um, I think Shobhan says I think there's a relevant distinction here between photos for art and photos for sharing memories. But so Shobhan, here's the deal, right? We're talking specifically from an artist point of view. We're not talking about it from a sharing memories point of view. Because if you take a photo for sharing memories, you obviously have an emotional attachment to that photo, right? It doesn't matter if it's a terrible photo. It doesn't matter if it's mostly out of focus, the exposure is wrong, and all of that. It matters that the person in it or the people in it have some emotional context for you, right? So I'm not getting into that side of it because that has a very low bar we have to cross, right? It just has to be a photo of something you care about. And I also have those photos. I have so many photos of Renuka. I have so many family photos. I have photos of my cat. All those are very meaningful, but I will never consider them to be art. Right? So my standards for those photos are exceptionally low. And so I will keep those photos even if they're terrible. So then those are completely different sides to the talk. Saurabh asked single catalog or multiple catalog, which one is advisable? Okay, we'll get to that. I'm going to talk about catalogs in a second, Saurabh, after this. So your question will be answered in a little while. The short answer is both ways work fine. There's no real advantage one way or the other. Tarun asks, I want to hear about histogram, how to read histogram. Tarun, we did a photography. So this is Lightroom 101, not photography 101. Uh, if you go to my timeline, you'll see the photography 101 section about histograms. Just watch the video. It's a little long, but you'll get your answer. Just go to the end of the video and it's all about histograms. Like you'll get your answer there. We'll do a little bit of it when I show you the actual Lightroom interface. You'll see some of it there, but it's just too long for me to cover now. Any other questions, guys, before we move on? Where does one draw an ethical line? A lot of photographers end up not mentioning the landscape photos have been manipulated. Amit, there is no ethical line here. Is it when you see a landscape photo, do you expect it to be, are you looking for photojournalism? Are you expecting the photo to be realistic, right? Uh, there's a there's a fine distinction here. Can you tell that the photo was edited? If you can't tell, I don't think it really matters. Let me give you an example of that. Almost every single Milky Way photo that you've seen, that anyone has posted, has been composited. Right? Almost every single Milky Way photo has a Milky Way shot at a different time and the foreground shot at a different time. Now, are you going to say that's not valid? It's actually almost, it's very difficult to do it any other way. So that's the only option you have, right? So there's no ethical line here. This shouldn't be a conversation about ethics. This should be a conversation about aesthetics, right? If you want to talk about ethics, then we get into photojournalism. That's why it'll do wonders for your own sanity not to be too concerned about the ethics of that kind of stuff. Sure, I would hope that most photographers will tell you that the sky was shot somewhere else and the foreground was shot somewhere else. I would hope that most people be open about sharing that information. But if they're not, um, if you can't even tell it was done, it doesn't matter. That means the person's good enough to completely fool you. If if it if you can tell it was done, that means it's the person who's doing it is just not good at their job. Right? I would just leave ethics out of the door there. Vikas asks, are there any parameters we should consider in the culling process? Because the only parameter you should consider is the photo a good photo? Now, what you call a good photo depends on you, right? Uh, It's just really important for you to get a good sense of aesthetics, a very good sense of aesthetics, so that you can understand aesthetically if a photo is good or bad. Understanding composition, all these things will widen your horizon to understanding whether a photo is good or bad. And one way of doing it is watch a lot of different kinds of media. Watch beautifully shot films. Look at the work of old master photographers. I don't mean the stuff which is being produced today. I don't mean the stuff being produced on Instagram. I mean, like, I'll show you books which I have. And when you see those, you'll understand how different work produced beautifully and artistically and aesthetically is different from the kind of overdone stuff that you see on Instagram. Sumit asks, digital blending thoughts. I think it's fine. I have no thoughts beyond that. Right? I think it's a fine practice if you can pull it off without people actually knowing that you're doing it. Right? So it's it's a matter of can you do it well enough so that it uh, that the viewer doesn't know it's been edited, right? Or the viewer is completely convinced and so let me put it this way, right? When you watch Lord of the Rings, did you care that none of that was real? Right? Did you even care? Did you go back and say, oh my God, Gandalf charging down the mountain, that's all CGI. It's all CGI. I don't believe it. There's something ethically wrong in them showing that to me. No, you were absolutely engaged, you were absolutely entertained, and you bought into it. It was done well. Now, if it was done badly, that would be a different problem. Then it would just suck you right out of the movie. Then you'd only notice the CGI. But when it's done well, it adds and builds into the story. So that's why it's important, right? I would never claim, I mean, I'm not going to claim that Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones is journalism, right? It's not. You know it's not. You know it's not supposed to be that way. So that the ethical standard is set right there. But it's to tell a story and you bought into the story. So mission accomplished, right? So Ketki says, in the case of portrait photography, we also see too much of editing. So my question is, how much should you edit? So when you see too much of editing, right? I'm assuming, Ketki, you mean that the skin is really smooth and all that. The skin looks like plastic. So that's a matter of editing being done badly. It's not too much editing. It's just editing done badly. By too much editing, do you mean that the photographer spent a lot of time editing? A photographer might spend 2 hours to edit a photo to make it look like nothing was done to the photo, right? So that's really, really important. What you think of as too much editing is not too much editing, it's bad editing, right? So your question about how much edit is, you edit as much as you want so that the result is what you want, right? Now, if the result looks unnatural and unrealistic, it just means your editing and your taste are not good enough to recognize it. Prashant asked a really important question. So that's a really important question. I was hoping someone would ask this. Prashant asks, why is the backup here, right? Why is the backup before culling and not here, which is after culling? Because I'm guessing Prashant's point is that you would actually save a lot of storage, right? Now here's the deal. Are you perfect? Is my question, right? Are you a perfect machine where you will never make a mistake culling, right? I'm not, right? I'll always maybe make a mistake once or twice. So now if I cull, by cull I mean remove the bad ones, I might accidentally remove some in there which are actually good photos, right? I might delete them. I might have some problem with them. And then when I want them back, there's no backup for it. It's gone. The photos are gone, right? So that's why the backup is done before the culling. We'll give you a really good example of this in real life. We are going into something different now. We might not even get enough time to really start into Lightroom, but it's an important discussion. So when we're, uh, I think everyone's familiar with the scandal. Most of you who are my age or a little younger than me will know about Bill Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky scandal, right? So the most famous photo of Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky was of, so Bill Clinton basically claimed they were not familiar with each other, they didn't know each other, so on and so forth. Uh, One press photographer shot a photo of them together before the scandal broke out. Right now, this is a press photographer, and this was the days of film, and he had the habit of just taking all his film and just keeping it in a box and duplicating it whenever possible. That means doing scans of it whenever he could. So he did a backup of that file, and that was a meaningless photo. It was just Bill Clinton shaking hands or making contact with an intern in a crowd. That was just a throwaway photo, but he kept it. Now, after the scandal broke, he was one of the few people who had a photo of them together, right, in public. So that's a real life example of how backing up before culling is really important. If he had culled that photo, which he should have, right? By all intents, he should have culled that photo because it was a meaningless photo. But that came and became one of the most famous photojournalism photos, right? When you don't do editing like others, you always feel your photos are not good in front of others. It's a constant bothering thing. So, Katie, everyone goes through that, right? I uh, so here's the deal, right? If you feel like you're the absolute best at what you do, you're probably not the best, right? So you're probably actually pretty bad. So there's actually a little graph of this about. Let me just draw it here if I can. So this is. Let me just think of the right way to put this. Right, this is your confidence on this axis. This is your knowledge. Right? This is how you should think about it. So when you don't know anything, right, your confidence is low. When you start knowing some things and you don't really know a lot, your confidence goes sky high. Then when you start realizing that you really, really don't know what you want, what you're talking about, it's down here, right? And eventually, when your knowledge increases, you will settle off to something like this, right? So this is the graph that most artists go through, right? So the most dangerous place to be is here. This is the most dangerous place. This is called the Dunning-Kruger zone. Look it up. Look up Dunning-Kruger. It's a really funny thing. Dunning-Kruger is basically the idea that the people who are most confident about some people who don't know stuff, who are ignorant, actually tend to be much more confident than people who are experts, right? So if you constantly get bothered that your photos are not good enough, you're probably here somewhere. That means your knowledge is good, and you know that you don't know that your knowledge is good, right? And that's the best place to be because then you will constantly try and improve. If you're here and you get stuck here, if a lot of people get stuck here, then you'll never get any better, right? You'll think you're the best because you just don't know how bad you are, right? So this is important. Don't get stuck in the Dunning-Kruger zone, and you're not because you're obviously saying that your photos don't, it doesn't feel good. I feel my photos are bad all the time. I feel they suck, right? I honestly do. I don't think my photos are any good. I see a lot of better stuff online, but it doesn't bother me. I know eventually I will get better, right? I just have to stick to the program. What's the program? Constant, a cycle of constant improvement. And eventually I will get better. I know it. It's a fact. I will get better because I have evidence to support it. I used to be much worse before, and now I'm better. And the only difference is I put in the work. So I'll obviously get better again, right? The only dangerous thing is to think, yeah, I'm amazing. I rule. No one's as good as me. And I know people like that. Believe me, I know a few people like that. And that's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy because they will never get any better, right? So don't worry about feeling bad about your work. It just means that it just means that so let me just draw another diagram here. Can I put another page here? Um, yeah, right. So let me draw another. Now we're going way off topic, but it's an important thing to communicate to people, right? So this is your taste, right? This line indicates your taste. That is your ability to understand if something is good or bad, right? And then you have your skill, right? And this skill is here, right? There's always going to be a gap between your taste and your skill, or rather, there should be a gap between your taste and your skill. Your taste is where you want your photos to become, what you want your vision to become. That's your vision, that's your dream. Your skill is what you can do right now. And there should always be a gap between these two. There should always be this gap. This gap should exist. If this gap goes away, which means your skill and your taste are identical, that means you'll never get any better, right? So that's just a very tangential thing, but that's what I wanted to talk about. Okay. Parag says two photographers, two different systems, Sony and Nikon. Both photographers edit by themselves. The colors look different. Both editors post editing. How to fix this? You can't fix this. You can't fix this at that point. You can't fix this problem after the editing is completed. You have to fix this problem during editing. And it's a completely fixable problem. I shoot every possible system. Right? In any given wedding, there's sometimes we're shooting Canon, Nikon, and Sony, if at all possible. We're mostly a Nikon shop. We almost always use Nikon equipment because we like it. But I shoot Sony sometimes because there's some lenses which I want on it. Uh, During the editing process, I can color match it. I can't do it afterwards. It's not possible. Okay, so before we get too caught up in the weeds, let me just give you an introduction into Lightroom, right? So this is the Lightroom interface. I'll start up Lightroom in a second so you can see it. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Lightroom interface right now. Just give me a second. I'm just going to start up Lightroom to give you a brief overview of the Lightroom interface so you can see it. Okay, so right now on the screen, you're going to see the Lightroom interface. Now, don't worry if it looks a little small on the screen, just see it in broad strokes. And I want you to just appreciate how beautifully designed the interfaces. So Lightroom, as I said, is designed end to end only for photographers, right? It's only meant for photographers. Um, so if you look on top, there are different. So the way Lightroom is oriented is you have panels on the side. You have these things which are the panels, the things which are making disappear and come back onto the screen. Those are the panels. On top, you have all the modules. You have library, develop, map, books, slideshow, print, and web. Now, the way the panels or the modules are oriented basically aligned to the workflow. Okay, so let me just explain that again in a bit. Okay, so just go to zoom in. So this is I have on the screen the Lightroom interface right now. These are panels, right? That's a panel there. There's a panel hidden here which I'm not showing you right now, but I'll show you in a bit. And on top, these are modules. These are called modules. So I'll just mark that off here. Right? So these are modules. So the beautiful thing about the way Lightroom modules are designed are that the modules actually follow the workflow, right? So library, if you look at the library module, what is the purpose of the library module? The purpose of the library module is to basically view the photos. Let me just use a different color. Right? What is the purpose of the library module? The purpose of the library module is for viewing, culling, right? Viewing and culling. It's basically for image organization. Then you go to the develop module. Right? Afterwards, you'll go to the develop module. The purpose of the develop module, it's only one. It's only for editing. Right? So use the develop module for editing. And if you look at the last one, print, web, slideshow, book, map, forget map. Map doesn't matter. The rest are all export. All these are export modules. These are all export. Right? So it's organized in a way that it conforms to the workflow. Right? So it's organized in a really beautiful way. Now we'll get to that and we'll get to how it works in a second. And you can see how each module is used in this particular chart, but don't worry about it right now. We're going to go past it. First, let's talk about Lightroom file management because this is what trips up most people, right? This is what creates lots of problems for people. So the way Lightroom handles files is not very intuitive if you don't understand, if you haven't dealt with something like this before. So this is worthwhile going, and most of our time today is just going to be spent about talking about file management, the most important part about Lightroom and where Lightroom really shines, right? So let's talk about Lightroom file management. Okay, now this is really cool. So whenever you start Lightroom, so I'm just going to use Lightroom right now, and I'm going to create what's called a new catalog. Okay, so I'm just going to do new catalog. Just going to call that test. You can't see it right now, but let me just show it to you. I'm just creating something called a test catalog. Let's get this time. Okay, so when you first start Lightroom, just give it a second. It's a little slow as I mentioned earlier. When I have the streaming software going on, everything gets hammered a bit. All the CPU performance of my machine is pretty bad. So once you open Lightroom, the first thing that will happen is Lightroom will create something called a catalog file, right? And you'll see this screen once you open Lightroom. If you look on top on my screen, you'll see it says test catalog.lrcat, right? This is what's called the catalog file. Lightroom requires a catalog file to function. Now, what is a catalog file? That's this. Okay, so have a look at this. So this is the catalog file. I call it the cat file. It's just easy for me to remember. Okay, so what is a catalog file? Whenever you start Lightroom, a catalog file is generated. A catalog file contains all the file locations that Lightroom needs to know. So Lightroom is not like Photoshop. In Photoshop, if you wanted to edit a file, you would take the file, drop it into Photoshop, and then edit it and forget about it. No, Lightroom doesn't work that way. Lightroom is actually primarily a file management utility. It's a full end-to-end workflow. And what is a big part of our photography workflow is managing files. So Lightroom actually helps you manage files. How does it help you manage files? Through this thing, through the cataloging system, or through the catalog file, right? Through this, the cat file, or the lrcat file, right? It's essential for Lightroom to function. It contains file locations, where are all the files, and I'll show you all this in a second. All the image adjustments, all the metadata, which is the data about the data, information about the files, and collection information. Collections will come to later. Just remember this for now. It does not contain presets. So if you make a preset in one catalog, that preset, the presets don't carry forward back and forth with catalogs, right? It doesn't contain camera profiles. It doesn't contain smart previews, right? All this stuff. I know it's a little esoteric right now, but you'll get to it. Now remember this part. For a complete backup solution, image files and LRCAT files must be backed up, right? You have to back up both. You have to back up the images as well as a catalog file once you start using Lightroom. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so now what does a catalog file look like? Let me just show you. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to show you a catalog file. Okay, so now you can actually see there'll be a weird effect going on in a second. Okay, now you can see my Lightroom folder in my machine, in my MacBook. Inside that, you'll see a folder called test, and this is the test catalog. Oh, this is a different test catalog. I think I put that one somewhere else, but you get the idea. So these are all the different catalogs that I have. Let me open the test catalog. I double click on a catalog to open a catalog. And now it's opened the test catalog. Okay. So this is one catalog that I opened. Let's say I want to open a different catalog. Now notice in this catalog, it says there are 110 photos, right? This doesn't mean there are 110 photos on your computer. It means that this particular catalog of Lightroom, this particular library that you're using of Lightroom only knows about these 110 photos. It doesn't know about other photos. Right? So let me just open another catalog. Yeah, let's open the original test catalog. This is what I'm opening now is the new catalog which I just created. Right now, this catalog has no files in it. It doesn't know about any files on my computer. Right? So there's no information in here. Now, what is the first step? Let's go back to our workflow. All right, we're going to go back to our workflow, and I'm going to show you how this whole thing works. Right now, this is an empty catalog. It has no information about any photos. So the first step in our workflow, if you remember the workflow, the first step of our workflow was after capture was ingest, right? So ingest is basically import. So I'm just going to write that down. Right, we're bringing photos into the library. Now, to do that, you hit the import button. It's a nice, very big friendly button. Lightroom always has big friendly buttons. Right now, I have some files sitting somewhere. I'm just going to pull them in here. I hope. Ooh, let's see what I have. Okay, so I have some film scans sitting here. I don't know if there are any other photos in them. Okay, let me just import these photos of my cat. That'll be easier to start with. Right, so now I've imported this. Now, basically what I've done is made Lightroom aware of the existence of these photographs. So now the catalog file, testcat.lrcat knows about these 4 photographs. Only this catalog knows about these four photographs. The other catalogs have no idea about these four photographs, right? So they're siloed. One catalog has access to a set of files. Another catalog has access to a set of files. Now, it is completely possible for two catalogs to reference the same files. Completely possible. That's fine. It doesn't make a difference, right? But just remember that a catalog refers to a set of files. Okay. And now let me just do the import again. I'm just going to take a minute and stop for a second to take care of any questions because there might be a few questions here. Sorry, I didn't show you the import process because I wasn't sharing my screen. So let me just show you the import process again. I'm going to take this, right? And I'm going to import these files. Once I import these files, you'll see that Lightroom is saying import files in the current location. So now Lightroom is aware of 25 files, not Lightroom, sorry. This catalog of Lightroom, testcat.lrcat, is aware of these 25 files. Right? And this is one of the files, this is a photo of my cat again. Cool. So I'm going to stop for a minute and answer any questions that you might have so far. Yeah, sorry guys, I shifted to the screen. I forgot I was not on that screen. So I just shifted to it right now. Okay. So any questions so far? I'll just wait a couple of minutes for questions. We might go 10, 15 minutes overtime. Sagar, there's nothing really important on the top left. There is some important information on the bottom right. So that's why I'm just keeping myself out there. So any questions about this, guys? Then we'll just move on. You can see on the screen right now, I'm showing you the four different catalogs I had in place in this particular thing. Okay, after importing, there are four options on the upper side. I'm going to get to the import dialog box in a second, Chinmay, so you'll see. Does a catalog file only refer to files or also settings and presets? So see, Ajay, catalog does not have any of the presets. So for example, the presets are stored in your computer's Adobe folder. So if you take your catalog and you take it to a different computer, you will not have any of the presets. You will have the settings. By the settings, I mean if you change exposure or any of those things are inside a catalog. You can see that in this thing. So the image adjustments are there inside the catalog, but the presets are not, right? The presets don't exist in the catalog. So if you take your catalog and take it to a different machine, you will not have your presets, but you will still have your settings. Uh, oh, okay. All right. So a lot of questions are coming in. So let me just go through these one by one. Parag says, what happens if one loses the cat file? Okay. Parag, if you lose the cat file, you basically lose all your edits. Everything goes, right? And there is a way around it, but in general, that's how you should treat it. So you should not lose your cat file. You have to make sure the cat file is backed up. That's super important. Chinmay, I'll get to your question in 1 minute. Uh, Pranay, I'll get to your question also in 1 minute. I'm going to show you the import dialog box in detail. Sometimes, as I go again to see my photos in Lightroom, I can't see them. So Sagar, again, I'm going to talk about that in just 1 minute. Vinayak asks, is it good to keep catalogs for all photos on the system, or can we delete catalogs once the work is done? Well, you could definitely delete it. But the catalog doesn't really take too much space. I'll show you some of my catalogs. They don't take too much space. So I don't think there's much point in deleting it. But So I'll show you my workflow for weddings and then it will probably make sense. Does catalog acquire some space on disk as equal to photo size? No. So the catalog is generally very small. To give you a sense of the size, right? I currently have a catalog. I have one which I call my global catalog. So that catalog has all my photos. That catalog has maybe about 350,000 photos in it, right? Now, by saying it has 350 photos in it, the catalog file itself does not contain 350 photos. It just contains information about 350 photos, right? So that's what it has. The size of this catalog is about 3 GB, right? So it's not very big. Prashant says, due to lack of understanding, I've imported a lot of images in Lightroom and now it's a mess. Is there a way to clear it completely? Prashant, definitely there's a way to clear it completely. I'll show it to you, but you don't need to clear it completely, right? I'll talk about that in a second. Can we import all photos settings in different locations at once? I don't know what that means, Swapnil. Can you just rephrase that question? What are your recommendations on file folder management? How to keep it all manageable? On file, I mean not in catalog. So Shobhan, for Lightroom, right? The assumption that we make in Lightroom is that the folder structure is not very important, right? It's more important to maintain the Lightroom catalog. The Lightroom catalog will help you organize stuff much better. The file folder stuff, there's a big limitation for it, right? So I'll explain to you in a second, but there's a big limitation with trying to manage everything through folders. I'll show you my folder structure right now. If I can, let me just show you my folder structure right now. Let me see if I can pull it up. I'll show you my personal folder structure. I need to connect to my network drive to show you. Let me just pull up my folder structure so you all can see it. Just want to make sure that everyone sees it. I can't pull it up right now. I can't access my network drive. But once I access the network drive, I'll just show it to you guys. Okay, so right now I can't do it, but once I figure it out, I'll show you. So now I'm just going to show you the import dialog box once again, so you understand how Lightroom works for file imports. Okay, I'm just going to fire it up again. Okay, so I'm just going to put it up on screen. So this is Lightroom. We're going to do another import, right? And I'll try and import it out, a few photos from my network drive. So let me just move my face to the corner. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to just hit import. Okay. So how does the import dialog box work? So Lightroom is very beautifully organized. There's a from, what am I going to do with the files, and where am I going to copy the files, right? So it's always in that direction. You can see how the arrows are pointing, right? It's very logical. It's very easy to understand. So let's try and import some files, all right? I'm going to import some files from a cycle race that I shot with my drone a long time ago. Let me see if I can get those files. Yeah, so these are the files. I'm now see what happens. Once I select the folder where I'm going to ingest from, now these files exist on my hard drive. So there'll be a completely different process here. If you put a memory card in, you will see something slightly different. Okay, so now how does it work? This is the source. The source is this network drive. These are the files. They're inside this folder called drone. Now there's an option to copy as DNG, to copy, to move, or add. Now what do each one of these mean? Copy as DNG will take the file, it will convert it to a DNG file. DNG is a universal raw format. It's Adobe's idea of what a raw file should be, right? So I don't do that because it's just an extra headache. I don't bother with that. Then the option is copy. Copy will take those files, make another copy of it, and put it somewhere else. Move is cut paste. It will take the files, move them somewhere else, and remove the originals. And the last one is add. And it'll always give you a little explanation under each one, right? So you can see add photos to catalog without moving them. So what does this do? It just tells the catalog, remember this catalog, which is testcatalog.lrcat, it'll tell this catalog that these files are in this location. Please just add them to your catalog. So it won't change anything. Now, this is my recommended thing for people who are starting from scratch. Like you already have your own way of organizing files. You like making organized structures of events and putting them in years and all that, however you want to do it, right? So you really like that way of doing it. So if you really like that way of doing it, you don't need to make Lightroom do anything. Lightroom will not even try and organize it for you. Then you just hit add to my catalog, and then what do I do after that, right? Uh, so all this stuff I'll come to in a second, but now let's look at what happens if you hit copy. If you hit copy, so now if you put a memory card in, it will only give you this option. It will only give you the option of copy. Why is that? So Lightroom at its heart tries to stop you from hurting yourself, right? It's basically idiot proof. It tries to stop you from doing stupid things. So if you use a memory card obviously is something that you shot on your camera and you put it in. You don't want to cut from there, right? And obviously you can't add from there because add means tell Lightroom that your photos are on your memory card. Now what happens when you remove the memory card? Now the photos won't be visible, right? So you can't do that. So what you want to do instead is the only option you'll get to the memory card is copy. So you can copy files from a memory card and put it on your hard drive, which is the ingest part of our workflow. Now, what are you saying? You're saying copy photos from this location to this location, right? To this location. So it's right now copying these folders. I'm just going to take a few of them. I'm not going to take all of them. I'm just shift selecting. So I'm only selecting 8 photos. What am I going to do? Forget the file handling part of it right now. We'll come to that later. You can rename the files as you import them. So let's say now you can see all the drone files are called DJI underscore 63 or something. That's not a very meaningful name. So if you want to, you can rename them. You can rename them as date file name, which is not very meaningful. You can give them a custom name. So let's say custom name, drone cycle base. I could use camel case, I could do anything. So now everything will be changed to this name, right? It'll have a custom name sequence. Drone cycle race 1, drone cycle race up to 6. So it'll change these names. And you might like to do that. I don't know if you want to do that. I don't do this, but that's an option available to you. Apply during import. So it actually will allow you to put a preset on the file as you're bringing them into Lightroom. I don't do that. The next one is destination. Where do you want to copy the files, right? So right now it's copying it to Mac OS users pictures. It's copying them to my picture file folder, but I don't want that. Let's say I want to copy it into my temporary folder, a temporary folder which I created here, right? Now I want to organize it into subfolder. I want to organize by date, which means that Lightroom will automatically create a folder with a date. And what is the format? It can create it with a numeric date, 2020 0408. Uh, we can do that. Create one which says April, June, whatever. You can see it's creating the folder. It's creating a folder called 2019 June 8th because these photos were shot on the 8th of June in 2019, right? Or it can create, it has a number of options available to you. So you can explore those options and figure it out. Once I do that, I just hit import. Now when I hit import, it's going to copy these photos. Disable that. Right, you can see the photos are getting copied over. Right? So that's all 8 photos. Now these 8 photos were copied from that location into the temp folder. If you see, there's a folder now in temp 2019 June, right? And if I go to my finder, if I go to that location, temp 2019 June, you can see that the rename files are here, right? So it's copied the rename files. So in the original case, I just added these files. I just added these files. So they've not been moved around, right? They're in their existing location. In this case, in the second case with temp, I copied the files. I actually made another copy in another location for these files. This is what you would do normally with a memory card. And the original case of just adding is what you would do with your existing files on your hard drive, right? Or on whatever disk you're using. Cool. So now I'll just take a second to answer any questions. After that, we'll go on to talk about the library module in more detail. Okay, so let me just stop for a second and ask questions. I put my whiteboard back up. Just give me one second. I'll just put on a blank notebook so I can answer your questions. Okay, all right. Vinayak says, okay, I am going to go back. There are lots and lots and lots of questions. Okay. Onkar says the LCAT will depend on the underlying folder structure. But what happens if you change the folder structure? The next time you open the LCAT, it won't be able to find the photo there. So how do you manage that? That's a good question. I'm going to show you how to solve that problem in just a minute. Right, I'll show you practically how to solve that problem. Can we use a catalog on different machines without having the raw photos on both machines? So it's not an easy answer. It's not a straightforward answer. So Jagdish, yes, you can use a catalog on different machines, but if you don't have the raw photos, the catalog won't be able to access the raw photos, so you won't be able to edit unless you create something called a smart preview. And you would have to copy these smart previews with the catalog file. This is more complicated. I'll get to this later. This is a slightly more advanced technique. Vinayak says year, month, date, location, event. That's how I manage it on this. Whatever works. I'm not going to tell you how to manage your files. See, everyone's got their own way of handling their files, right? I'm not going to say my way of doing it is better or your way is worse. But the thing is, Lightroom takes away a lot of the heavy lifting. You can use Lightroom for a lot of the stuff which you're actually using folders and files for. Right? So that's why I prefer Lightroom. Okay, Rahul has, should we keep our current catalog in SSD, which contains my OS, or my external hard drive, which contains my photos? Will that affect working speed? That's a great question. So, so just let me just add a page here so we can talk about what this looks like. Okay, so this is your computer or your laptop, and you have an internal SSD. Most laptops will have an SSD, and then you have an external HDD. Right? And this is from experience, right? What I'm telling you is out of experience. This is a little anecdotal, but catalogs must always be on SSD, right? Ideally on your internal SSD. You can put it on an external SSD, it's fine, but it should be on the fastest drive that you can manage, right? So catalog should be on your fastest drive. Your raw files ideally should also be on the SSD or the HDD. It doesn't matter. Practically, it's not possible to put them all on your hard drive. It's just better to have it on your SSD, but you can put it on your hard drive. It's fine, right? So if you have a storage problem, if you have a space constraint, then it should be catalog on SSD and files on HDD, right? So this is fine. This works. Vinayak says, I've been copying photos from hard drive to catalogs. Is it better to add? Yes, it's better to add because Vinayak, now what you're doing is doubling your storage requirement, right? You're creating two copies of it. So let me just draw out how this works. Okay. So this is your catalog file, right? So your catalog file knows where your raw files are, right? This is how it behaves. It knows where the raw files are, so it can manage your editing. When you say copy, right, what you're doing is creating a second copy of your raw files that the catalog knows about. So now you have two copies of your raw files. There's no point. You don't need to do it this way. Mm, it's better just to add. You're just doubling your storage requirement, unless you're doing it for a backup. Now that's a different problem. Now that's a different discussion. Okay, the memory card scenario. After backing up via Lightroom, shall we cull from the card or make another? Shall we cull from the card or make another copy in laptop storage and cull from that? Amit, you never ever cull anything from a memory card, right? You never do anything like that on a memory card. You don't do multiple weird writes onto a memory card. Just generally avoid that. Culling should be done. See, by culling, I don't mean delete, and you will see what I mean by culling in a very, very short while. But you don't delete anything from a memory card now. When you are confident that you've copied, you've done your ingest and you've done your backup, you can format your memory card. But you never cull from your memory card. You should always make a copy in laptop storage and cull from that. The same process for wedding photos as well. When we have multiple camera files and large number of files, yes, it's the same process. What I'm showing you applies to everything. I'm not showing you a unique solution or a separate solution for personal photos and wedding photos. So see, when I say workflow, right? When I do this, when I show you the workflow here, this is true for whether I'm doing personal photos or whether I'm doing professional work, right? The reason why I decide to do it this way is because it has to become a habit, right? I have to wake up in the morning or wake up in the middle of the night and be able to do this every time, especially for weddings. So if I do it for my personal work as well, it becomes a better habit. It becomes a stronger habit. So I always do it this way. It doesn't matter if it's personal work or professional work, right? Okay. Now I know why my catalogs are getting huge and eating up my C drive. Well, your catalogs will never get big, Vinayak. It will always be your files which are taking up all your space, right? Your catalog. So I'll show you how big a catalog file is. Hold on. So the current catalog file that we're using right now, just show that to you. Let's have a look at that catalog file. That's that's here, this catalog file, right? So this catalog file is only 1.7 MB, right? This one is a little bigger, 227 MB. This is the one which you're using right now. This is 211 MB, right? The catalog files will never get very big. What will get big are these previews and some other stuff, but the catalog file itself will be pretty small. And the catalog file is the only thing you need to back up. You don't need to back up anything. It's just the catalog file. Okay, I'll just wait for any other questions and we are running a little short on time. So we'll just do one, I'll just go over the library module once and then we'll stop for the day. And I just put the catalog file information up here right now. So please ask any other questions you have and then I'll move on to the library module. I just need to open some other catalog so that we can look at something a little more interesting. Cool. Girish says, can we move a catalog file to an external SSD and leave actual data on the hard drive of the machine? Yes, you can. You can definitely do this. Uh, yeah. Okay. Ashwin says previews versus smart previews. Can I share my thoughts? So that's a little more advanced than what we wanted to talk about right now, but I can give you a brief understanding of previews. So previews, anytime you open a file in Lightroom, you create a preview. Let me just show you a preview. Okay. So anytime I'm just going to minimize, I'm just going to show you Lightroom, show you this. All right. Okay. So I'm assuming everyone can, yeah. Okay. So this is the catalog which I have open right now, Lightroom catalog 2. This is the catalog I have open right now. Whenever I view, so this is a raw file. Let's look at this file. Okay. I have got some files that I have selected. Just look at those. Yeah, this is the one I want to look at. Okay, so this is the file we're looking at, right? This is a raw file. Now, if you, all the people who attended Photography 101 know that a raw file is basically just raw data. You need some way of interpreting that data, converting it into a viewable format. So this is now converted into a viewable format. What you're looking at right now is a preview file. A preview file is a rendered raw file just so that you can see the data, right? Otherwise, you just see a bunch of numbers. Now, every time you open a raw file, there's a preview. And that preview is, let me just show you the preview is here. So Lightroom Catalog 2 is the catalog. Associated with Lightroom Catalog 2 is a preview file, right? This preview file contains all the JPEGs that are rendered internally to Lightroom. These are inside Lightroom. They're not for export. They're just generated so that you can see this file, right? If you could, if the previews were not there, you wouldn't be able to actually view the file itself, right? So that's a preview. Then there is an idea of something called a smart preview. All right, so I'll show you how to smart previews. If you right click, sorry, if you go to Lightroom, it's a little different for uh, Mac and Windows. So if you go to previews, you can hit build smart previews. I'm just going to say build one. Okay, so now what it's doing is building something called a smart preview. Now this is completely different from a preview. Now if I go back to Finder, you will see a new file called Smart Previews. Right now it's only 2.7 MB. Now, what is a Smart Preview? A Smart Preview is a low resolution raw file, a fake raw file. It's a low resolution fake raw file that Lightroom has generated just for you to be able to edit the file without needing too much CPU resources, right? So, and with a Smart Preview, you don't need the original raw file anymore. Like you can just unplug the hard drive in which the raw file was contained, and you could still edit from this. And I'll demo that later. Right? So that's how a Smart Preview works. That's the difference. And I'll get back to it in a bit. Let's just answer some more questions. So Ajay, I think I went through an idea of previews right now. Does a change in the location of the raw files after the catalog file is created affect in Lightroom? Yes. So not after the Lightroom catalog file is created, after the import is done. So I'll give you an example. I'll just show you an example right now. Okay. So have a look at this current thing, right? Inside this, there's a folder called temp. This folder temp contains 4 of my cat's photos, right? So let's go to that folder. That folder is here, temp. I'm going to rename this folder to temp2, right? Now Lightroom doesn't know about this folder anymore, right? Now that folder is called something different. So how does Lightroom know about it? It doesn't. So if I go back here, right, you'll see these exclamation marks. These exclamation marks indicate that the folder is moved. Lightroom doesn't know what that folder is anymore. So now Lightroom can't do anything. Like if I try and edit this file, right? If I go to develop and try and edit the file, there'll be a warning. The file could not be found, right? So here's the deal. Once you import it, you shouldn't be changing folder locations outside of Lightroom. You shouldn't be moving things around outside of Lightroom. If you do, there's an easy fix. Is there something else I can help with? Just right click on this, say find missing folder, right? And go to where that folder is supposed to be now. Now it's temp2, say choose, and that fixes the problem, right? Now it's back. Now you won't see the exclamation mark, and now you can actually edit. That warning will go away. Right? But let's say I wanted to change the name of this temp2 folder. So these are all the folders, right? If I wanted to change the name of this temp2 folder, I would just right click on it and rename it here. Now this works because now Lightroom's aware of those changes. Okay, let's go back to the questions. Mm, to make things machine independent, oh, this is a good question. To make things machine independent, is it better to keep everything on external SSD, data, catalog, everything? Is that the best practice? So that's so ideally, uh, I don't do it this way, but so to give you a sense of how I do it, I have all my catalogs sitting in the fastest machine in my house. That's my 16 core desktop machine. That handles everything. Right? So that has the catalog files stored locally, and those catalog files are backed up over the network. The data is sitting on my network drive, right? So that works fine. I don't need it to be portable because I'm essentially only editing on that machine. Now, if I get a different machine, I just have to take the catalog files and move them there. I don't really need to make a plan for it. The best practice, honestly, for the sake of performance, is to just keep your catalog on your fastest drive, on locally on your fastest drive in your machine. If you need to move it to a different machine, just copy it and move it. Okay. Hey, Ari, good to see you. Okay, so now let's just go back into Lightroom and I'll show you a couple of other things about Lightroom. Okay, so I'm assuming just keep adding questions to the stream, and it's the last thing we'll do today because we're already taking up a lot of time. Okay, so now we're back in Lightroom. So just as a fun thing that I wanted to show you guys. And where are all these? Where are all these? Yeah. Okay, so we are at the import stage right now, right? So I just want to show you on Lightroom. I just want to show you the layout of this tool of Lightroom of the library module. So once we finish import, you will see all the files that you imported. So I imported these 1,600 files. They all come here. Just for the sake of this class, I imported 1,644 files from my network drive onto this so we could all see them. Now, Take a look at this panel on the left. In this catalog, I'll tell you what all this means. Okay, I'm just going to hide everything which is not relevant. In this catalog, Lightroom catalog number 2, it has 1682 files that it knows about, right? Wherever those files are. Now the next section is folders. What is folders? Where are those files located on your file system, right? So if I click this, you will see that 17 files, these 17 files are inside my macOS folder. 60 files are under exports, 3 files are under studio sessions in this. In my macOS data drive, there are some files. In my photography network drive, there are 1644 files. So this shows you where the files are, where the folders are. This helps you fix the problem that someone mentioned about if you move the folder later, how do you fix the problem? You can fix it by just right clicking here and update folder location, right? So you can fix it that way. Now comes the fun part. Okay. So what is the power of Lightroom? What is realistically, the true power of Lightroom? The true power of Lightroom is not that it can manage files and all this stuff. This is an important thing. The true power of Lightroom is its ability to let you work on the metadata of the files, to use metadata of the files to help you organize everything much better. So let me give you an example. This is all photographs, right? These are all the photographs that I have that this catalog knows about. 1862 files. So let's say, for example, you guys have these and however you're organizing. So Vinayak, as an example, was using year, date, day, whatever, right? So if I ask you very quickly to give me all the photos that you shot, let's say in January 2019, right? What you'd have to do is go to the file, go to the folder, so on and so forth. In Lightroom, it's really easy. You just hit the metadata tab and you get all these columns. Now I can go to 2019 and I can go right down to the date that I wanted. These are short photos I shot in May. That's Shailendra. These are short photos I shot in May 2019, right? And I can even drill down even better. Now it gets even more interesting. If I ask you, can you give me, for example, all the files that you shot in May 2019 with a Nikon Z7 with a 50 mm lens at a shutter speed above 1 by 200, or sorry, at a shutter speed below 1 by 200 at ISO 64. Could you do that easily? It'd be really difficult, right? But in Lightroom, it's actually really easy. So I can just add columns here. So let's say May Z7, 50 mm lens. I want everything which is below 1 by 200. So from 1 by this to this, right? And I want all of them at ISO 64, whatever is the least ISO, so 64. So I shot 16 photos that way. Right? So these are the 16 photos I shot, which are shot with a 50 mm lens at ISO 64 below 1 by 200 shutter speed, right? It was that easy. I could find stuff so easily. Right? So this is the true power of Lightroom, to be able to do these kind of searches in metadata really fast. You can do these kind of things really, really quickly. Right? Oh, shoot, sorry, it's a little confusing. Okay, now this is just the basic part of it. This is the metadata search. Now we come to, so we talked about folders. Now we come to another really useful feature of Lightroom, which is collections. So collections are basically virtual folders. So collections are folders which only exist inside a catalog. They don't exist outside the catalog. And then some of you will be asking me, okay, so what's the benefit? The benefit is that let's say I create two collections. Let me call this NYC Streets. Let me call this collection New York City. NYC. Okay, so now I created two collections, New York City Streets. Now I want to take all the photos that I shot in New York. Now I don't know which those are yet, but I know roughly what date those were. Right, so I know they were in May. I know they were probably in this date range. This is New York, this is New York, this is New York. So everything from Thursday onwards, yeah, everything from Friday onwards was New York City. Right? So I take all these photos and I can put all of these into a collection called New York City. Right? Command D to deselect. So now this collection is all the photos that exist in New York City. But some of these photos are actually street photos, right? Which I want as a separate collection. All the photos which are shot in the streets of New York. So I take those photos, drag and drop them into New York Street. So now there are 26 photos in here. Now, what's the interesting thing here? If I did this with folders, if I created a folder with all the photos in New York and I created another folder with all the photos in New York City streets, that would take up more space because some of those photos are duplicate, right? So some photos are both in New York City and some photos are also New York City streets. So that will take up double the space. A collection does not take up double the space, right? So you can have any number of duplications inside collections and it doesn't add to your storage requirements. So it's a much more elegant way of organizing your files, right? So now when we get to this point, how do you select? So we've finished importing, we finished organizing. We organize using folders, we organize using collections. You can even make a folder of collections called a collection set. I can call this USA travel. Right? So this is a collection set. It's a folder of collections, and I can put things in here. Like that. So that's a folder of collections. Right now, once we finished all the importing, how do we cull? So let's say I got these 26 photos, and I want to start culling them. So there's a very simple way to cull in Lightroom. I'm just going to bring up my whiteboard so I can show you. So culling, there's a flag for culling, a white flag. This is called pick. There's a black flag. I can't draw the black flag, of course, because there's a black background. This is reject. And the third state is unflagged. So Lightroom has many ways of being able to indicate files, right? This is one way of being able to flag files or distinguish files. Lightroom also has color coding. You can color code and you can even do a star rating from 0 to 5 stars. So you can use any one of these to cull your files. But let's say I prefer using this because there's some really easy shortcuts for this. So P is pick, X is reject, and U is unflag. I only use these three shortcuts. So let's cull these photos really quickly. Right? Okay, I like this one, so I'm going to press P to pick it. Go next, go next. This is a really interesting street scene. Hit P, pick it. Right? Another really interesting, the New York bodegas. So I just go down to whatever I like, and I'm going to press P to select that file. So that's how I do culling. Right now, notice that I'm not using the X button. I'm not using the X to set something as rejected. There's a really simple reason for that, and I'm going to just leave that as a question for you guys. If someone can throw up the answer on the chat, it'll be really helpful. So I'll just show you how I'm doing this again. Sorry, I didn't have the screen up. So I press P to pick, P to pick, X to reject. I never do X to reject. I just go through these and pick out the photos that I want, right? With the P button. So that's how I'm doing culling. That's how I'm selecting the ones which I like, right? Just using the P key. Okay, so now I'm just going to take a few questions. So this is the culling aspect of it. This is how we do culling. Okay, now let's go back here. Okay, we know Vineet asks, how do I purge cache of previous unwanted cat files to save space? Vineet, okay, so you're using 3 or 4 terms in there and mixing them up. The cat files are never in the cache. The cat files have a cache, right? And if you want to purge the cache, there's an option in Lightroom, just one button press, and you can purge the cache off a catalog. A catalog itself is not in a cache. Have you had any luck with location metadata in Lightroom? Yes, actually, location metadata works pretty well. So let me just show you that. Let me just show you location metadata. If I have if I have something which actually has, let me just import the drone photos. You'll see it here. Right, so I'm going to uncheck all, just pick these 4 photos and import them. So I'm just pulling in those 4 photos. Now you'll get this option. Whenever, if you take a photo which has GPS coordinates in it, it has location metadata, Lightroom will actually help you look it up, right? So then I go here, and if I click on this little map button, it'll go to the map module. Yeah, I don't need this. And it'll actually tell you where those photos are shot. So they were shot right here. There were 6 photos shot in this location. Right? So it works pretty well. All right. Any more questions? All right. So I'm actually going to stop here because it's the next part of it is actually far more involved than where we got to so far. But I just wanted to give you guys a flavor of Lightroom and why we're doing the things we're doing right now. Can we delete these previews later to save disk space? So Ajay, Lightroom automatically deletes previews after a certain period of time. But let's say you don't like the previews and you want to delete the previews. So all you do is, let me just show you. You go to Finder. All you do is to go